Hello, Kevin.
Hello.
Did you bring an acoustic guitar? This feels very, very giggy right now.
Yeah, late night rock and roll.
Absolutely. Did you get a chance to see much of that on the big screen? Have you seen it on an IMAX screen before? It looks and sounds terrific.
You know what? I actually have not seen it all the way through in IMAX yet. I saw some of it in Los Angeles at IMAX HQ when we were, doing the transfer, and I haven't managed to see the whole thing. I was going to New York tomorrow, but in a case of life imitating art, my visa has just been denied. So I'm not sure I'm going to see it. So I might have to buy a ticket tomorrow.
Is anyone here from the embassy? Can anyone help Kevin out with his visa? It looks and sounds absolutely terrific.
Yeah, I mean the concert footage is brilliant, and that's obviously the reason to do it in IMAX is because the it's as close as you'll ever get to seeing John Lennon live.
I mean, he sounds incredible during that concert. It's absolutely wild.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's so striking when you watch and you think, God, he didn't really do this again.
Yeah.
This is like the last time he did a full concert, and he was so good at it. It's like not. I mean, in my head, you see, I always thought, the Beatles are a studio band,
Yeah.
but he really knew how to have an audience in the palm of his hand.
He's in full voice. He sounds great. Yeah, it's terrific. But in terms of that footage, of that concert footage, that was your way in, because this wasn't on your to-do list necessarily.
No, I got a phone call or an email from Peter Worsley, the producer, who I think had spent several years trying to get the rights to make a film around this concert, and because he knew that the Lennon estate were trying to restore it, both visually and orally, because it was famously terribly recorded at the time and not brilliantly filmed, all of it. And so it kind of always been brushed under the carpet, and nobody thought it was very good. And I think the Lennon estate thought it wasn't representative of him and at his best. And so it was only with the advent of a kind of incredible new sound technology that there is, where you can really separate everything out and make everything really you can remix tracks that were previously very, very murky and muddy, that they thought, we can do something with this. We can make they're going to re-release the music obviously at some point, and I think Peter, the producer, thought this would be a great starting point for a film, and he came to me and said, I've got these rights, what, is there a film in here? And my first thought was, God, there's been so many films about John Lennon, what can you possibly do differently? And then I read this interview where John talked about how when he first arrived in America, all he did was watch TV in bed for months. And I thought,
the dream.
And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? There's like, you could make a film which is really about the archive and about it's only archive, but what they're seeing on TV, and that's then the conceit. And I thought that was an interesting film, and more than anything else, as someone who's made a lot of documentaries about artists and musicians and all sorts of people, I thought that's a different way of kind of seeing the past. It's kind of not pretending that you've got some sort of objectivity and that there's a ready-made narrative there. You're sort of like allowing the chaos of the past and just what survives to speak for itself.
Yeah, you're throwing people into the middle of this. You're letting the protagonists of the movie reveal themselves slowly. That you're seeing Jerry Rubin, but you don't know it's Jerry Rubin until later on. Yeah. That's an interesting way of...
Well, it's trusting the audience as well to be sort of like, I don't need to know the name of that person. Or I don't need to know, who played bass on that or what. It's just to experience it and to be dunked into the middle of it, like watching TikTok or something. You don't know who everyone is. You don't really care. You're just experiencing what you're experiencing in the moment, and you pick up an awful lot, and you pick up a lot about. Because in a way you're not handheld too much, I think you actually read much more into it. You're looking for those clues about what does this mean, what is that person saying, and what's going on here, and that makes it a kind of a more active experience, I think, to watch.
So did you immerse yourself in the events of 1972 in order to structure this and to shape it and have an idea of what the events were surrounding John and Yoko at that time?
Yeah, so Sam, the editor and co-director with me, and I spent many months sort of looking through Actually, he spent a lot longer than I did. Actually, I have to be fair. Looking through
60-40, 70-30. What are we talking?
I would basically say, let's see what there is on the Attica State prisons, and then Sam would watch, and he's probably here somewhere. Would watch about 20 hours of it, and then show me the best 10 minutes. So I definitely pulled the long straw. But we went through just looking what stories were there in that time, what are the iconic TV shows of that time, what are the iconic ads, what are the things, and just then sort of making this stew, which is quite fun. You just sort of like, oh, that doesn't feel quite right there. We need a little more salt, or we need a little more pepper. We need, to make something that feels like each clip reflects on the one before, but also maybe connects to something later on. And we wanted to have this feeling that the film is always sort of somewhere between order and chaos, and that you're not quite sure when you're watching it, is this just completely random? Yeah. But then you start to see connections and patterns in different ways, hopefully, as you go through it.
It's terrific on a second watch as well, once you see all the pieces click into place.
You have to see it twice.
At least twice. Ideally in the biggest IMAX screen you can possibly find. But it's fascinating as well, because halfway through, if I'm right in thinking, halfway through the editing process, something happened that kind of changed everything.
Yeah, because originally we didn't have these phone calls that are, I think, now in a way the center of the film. I got a phone call from Simon Hilton, who kind of is the historian and archivist and caretaker of the estate, and he said, "Oh, we've just found this box of tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, and it says audio recordings, 1972 on it or something." And it turned out to be these phone calls, and nobody had ever heard them. Nobody in the family had heard them since Yoko recorded them in that period, and so suddenly I was listening to these hours and hours of tapes, which mostly, it has to be said, were about the flies. I mean, literally, it was hours and hours and hours of recordings about flies, and A.J. Weberman going on and on and on about Bob Dylan's garbage for such a long time.
Which you would think would attract the flies. They should just gone to Dylan's garbage. I don't know. Someone give me a time machine.
You're here all week. So that was, it just gave you their voice and a sense of, them as they really are, I suppose, because they're not on camera, they're not performing, they're just being themselves. And so you get this, very rare little insight into sort of what it's like sitting on their bed with them while they're discussing, Alan Klein, and I love, that's my favorite phone call, is Alan Klein, the manager, who is like every manager in Hollywood still today, or probably in the music business too, where they're sort of like going to be all tough and tell their client, this is what you have to do, but within 5 minutes, like, you're a genius, you're great, whatever you want. And
you can hear him rolling his eyes.
Yes.
John's going to have got this great idea, and you can hear Alan going, "No, this guy, he's made you a lot of money, Alan. Stay
That's
with
a great
him."
idea. Just sing one song and leave. That's his,
Yeah. Maybe do Luck of the Irish rather than the really, really political one. But it is fascinating just listening to those phone calls. And it is interesting to me that the title of the film is 1-to-1, John and Yoko. And it feels to me that this film is kind of redressing the balance in a way with Yoko. She's had a lot of bad raps over the years. She even mentions it in one of those early phone calls about the treatment she received in England. Was that something that was important to you as you were starting out?
Yes, just because I think that whenever as a documentary maker you look at a subject and you think, why do people have this set view of a person, or why is there so much negativity and you don't understand it, or so much positivity and you don't understand it? And it's those little niggles that make you think, oh, there's something interesting, and something doesn't quite add up here. And I think what was particularly interesting to me was the idea that, people never really humanized Yoko. She was just this kind of the witch who turned into a bitch, or the bitch that turned into a witch. And actually, when I heard the story of her daughter who had been kidnapped effectively by her ex-husband, and how that's the reason they really went to America, was to look for Kyoko, I thought, my God, I didn't know that. I thought I knew about Beatles' story, and I didn't know this incredibly tragic tale. And then you start to see everything through that perspective. And the song that she sings, "Don't Worry Kyoko," at the concert suddenly becomes incredibly moving when you know what what it's about, and how much she is missing her daughter, and then of course the whole idea that the concert itself is about being a fundraiser for these kids, disabled kids at this really pretty horrendous medieval institution, Willowbrook. And you realize, that's why they're so sensitive about children being treated badly or being on their own, or because that's what they're thinking about a lot of the time. And it makes sense that would be the thing that they would do a concert for. The only benefit concert they ever did, the only full-length concert that John did after the Beatles stopped touring. It's about kids.
Yeah.
And that in itself is interesting. And I don't think even for the sort of in the way that this concert is remembered, and the way that first of all, at the time, it was really vilified. People didn't like it. It bombed, and that's one of the reasons he didn't carry on doing concerts. And it coincided, obviously, then with the failure of the mission to bring down Nixon and to stop his re-election. And I think that indirectly led then to John and Yoko splitting up, and this period in their lives where they lived apart, and John was the so-called lost weekend. He was sort of drinking too much and hanging out with his buddies in LA, and so it's the kind of the roots of all of that are in this moment, and you can sort of see this is a moment of great hope. We're going to rebirth the idealism of the '60s, but then it doesn't work like that.
No, absolutely. And in terms of the structure of the film, you go from there's that moment where we really dig into the story of Kyoko, and then you cut to that pure primal scream of a song that Yoko performs. Did you in a way mess, or not mess, but tamper with the structure of the concert in order to help with the documentary?
With everything. Yeah, we tampered with everything.
That's not the set list as performed.
No, I mean there were on the day they actually performed the set list twice all the way through. They originally had an afternoon and an evening show.
Yeah.
Basically, because they had one and it sold out, and then they did another one, and so we've used a bit of the best of between the two gigs, but it tends to be that the later performance is more raw and more kind of like out there, and as you'd expect, they're more practiced. They've had one go at it. Their voices are a bit tired, but they're really in the moment. So it tends to be more interesting emotionally, anyway. But yeah, the concerts were they're remembered as this very political thing, but actually they're not political. That's what I think is so interesting. That this remembered as John's political moment, but actually this is about kids. Yeah.
And in terms of that, what sort of contact did you have with Sean? I know that Sean was a big factor in this movie.
Yeah, so we had to speak to Sean to kind of get his blessing to make the film and to open up the archive, the family's archive, because obviously a lot of the material in here is their home movies and that kind of thing. And I pitched it to him. I said, I want to make a film which is this basically, and which is using clips from the period, and which is non-narrative and not in a conventional way. And he said, that sounds cool. Sounds like something my mum would love. And so that was it. He said, go ahead and do it. And then they gave us pretty much everything they had, I think, from the archive, and were incredibly helpful. And then I showed it to him when it was finished, or almost finished. And he didn't like the way we used instant karma, but we agreed to disagree on it, because he was like, that song is not about Vietnam and war, and I said, that's counterpoint, but no, he was very generous about it, and he said that he felt it was the film which represented his mother, in the most honest light, that he said that I recognize my mother in this. And then he told this very funny story about the moment when Allen Ginsberg is reciting the poem about how different cultures wipe their arses, and how he said, I was looking at that, and I was looking at my mother, and I could tell that expression she had on her face, that that was the expression she used throughout my childhood whenever anybody talked about anything scatological. She's so hygienic. She hates it when people talk about shit or piss or anything. And she had that exact expression on that I remember. She was hating sitting there as he said that poem.
So the moment you found that Ginsberg poem, you were like, that's going in. That's it.
Well, we love that. I mean, Allen Ginsberg is one of the kind of, I think, I love one of the things I love about the film is that it's peopled by all these eccentric and weird and interesting characters who are part of their gang.
Yeah.
And Allen Ginsberg, I think, is the purest of heart and the warmest of them all. And I think I just come away really liking him. And that poem, we got in touch with the estate of the Allen Ginsberg estate, said, can we use it? And they were very excited because nobody had ever heard that poem before. It's not in the canon, the Ginsberg canon. So it's a new Ginsberg poem.
That is amazing. Is that the biggest surprise or the biggest revelation that you had whilst making this movie?
What, that I liked Allen Ginsberg?
No, but that poem that was brought to life in a way.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the thing about, for me, that comes out of the film is that I feel their sense of questing to figure out how to live their lives and doing that in public in a very open way.
Yeah.
And I just don't think celebrities live like that now. You know, they're not kind of like so curious about the world and inviting everybody in. And there's a kind of inspiring. Sometimes it can be naive, and sometimes it can be unpleasant or cynical. But there's a curiosity about the world and a desire to kind of use their power to make the world a better place that I think is inspiring. That was really the first idea, and I think, you know, there's been that's my first reaction about the idea of making a film around this concert was, well, you know, we've all seen and heard all these the people who are survived now from that period, and they're all grey and old, and they've all told their stories many times, and so I thought, well, how else can you access the past and show it in a different in a slightly different light? And I think we were just very lucky that this period in John and Yoko's life is the period where they probably were out in public the most. There's the most archive of them, and they also they filmed stuff themselves on their little black and white home movie camera, and so there's lots and lots of material. I think if you've done it about any time before that or after that, there isn't really anything. I actually think it's the opposite. I think the world has just been copying our film. No, literally. We you know, Donald Trump had not been shot, but we'd finished the film, and you know, Kamala Harris wasn't standing for president yet. So there was. I just think there's something very strange happens in America where they're on a loop of 53 years, and the same things happen again and again. I don't know. It's very, very odd, and so no, we didn't start off thinking that it was going to be a political film about now, but it seems to be, to me, a film that is all about now.
Absolutely.
But that's magic. I don't know why.
That should help with the visa, Kevin. Okay.
Well, I think your wish will be granted because it is going to come out. The entire concert, or a cut of the entire concert, is going to come out. So yes, you'll be able to see it as a whole. So we selected the songs that we felt, you know, were the best performances, and we didn't play all of them at full length, but some of them are at full length, but not all of them. No. Because we kind of, I guess it's the balance between making a concert film and making a film about them and this time and around the concert. But yeah, that's one of the, you know, the balance might not be to everyone's taste. I agree. I think the Bob Marley film I made became a kind of oral history of Marley and of that time in Jamaica and reggae, and it felt like when I was interviewing all these people, it felt like a lot of them had not been interviewed before, and it felt just important to get them to speak and to be on camera. And because there's not very much archive of Marley, you know, there's nothing at all of him, I think, until he's 26 or something crazy, no footage really. It becomes about the words in a way, you know, it becomes about people just telling the stories of that time and of him. And because it's so magical, Jamaica and the characters, you know, I think it stands up as a film, even though, you know, it's not got much footage from the time. So you just always, with every film, I guess you're using what's available, and also with looking for those funny little things that don't make sense. And with Whitney and with Bob, I was trying to sort of understand the things that when you read the biographies and you're like, well, that's a bit weird. Why has that happened? Why? And to try and sort of put your finger on those. So with Whitney, the film is about, you know, why is she so unhappy? What is going on there? Why is she so miserable? Why did she never write a single song really herself, but sang so beautifully? Other people, and it comes, you know, not great surprise, but it comes to being about a film about sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. So, you know, that's this. I don't know if that answers the question. That's a really interesting question. I think it did change, actually, partly because it just listening to those phone calls, you feel very close to them. You feel very intimate and human and fallible, and but very fascinating. But also because, particularly with Yoko, I did feel like I understood from. I tried to make the last part of the film really from her perspective. You know, so she takes John to the first feminist conference, and you see him as the only man in the room, and then she makes this long speech about what it's like to be married to him, and how she was, you know, felt that she was stealing everyone's monument, and then she sings this beautiful confessional song about feeling suicidal and missing her daughter, and I think that, I hope that, because this is the effect it has on me, I sort of go, oh, I've seen the rest of the film up to that moment through her eyes and from her perspective. So I definitely came away feeling like, oh, I empathize and like Yoko much more than I did.
And did your opinion of John change at all?
Well, only in that he seemed more sort of human and vulnerable and fallible, but also just so damn open-minded and enthusiastic about everything. I love the fact that he's sort of, you know, you phone him up and go, you know, I met these Irish guys down the pub, and they want to protest. I'm very interested. Yes, I want to be there. And I just, it's a brilliant attitude.
I've got a filmmaker who can't get a visa. Yep, I'll sort it. Speaking of which, we got to let Kevin go. You gotta get your visa. You got to get to the airport. Yeah, absolutely. On that note, it's a good note at which to end. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for your questions. Please give it up for Kevin Macdonald, everybody.
Thank you.